Francesca Adamo. I'm one of the attorneys at the Cuddy Law Firm Valhalla office, and I'm co-presenting with Alison Morris. She'll introduce herself now as well.
Hi, I'm Alison Morris. I'm another special education attorney at the Cuddy Law Firm.
Okay, so we want to thank everybody for coming to this webinar. We're going to give you updates about special education services during the COVID-19 school closures. As you can see, Allison is at home. I am also at home with this beautiful Cuddy Law Firm virtual background. And we hope that everybody is home and staying safe. So we're going to give 10 reminders and updates that we think are important for families to know during this time. If you could keep your microphones on mute until the end, and then if you want throughout, you can write in the chat any questions that you may have, and Allison and I will try to tackle them. I'm going to turn over to Allison to begin.
And the main takeaway you're going to see throughout these 10 updates and reminders is to be keeping track of everything right now, document everything going on with your child's education and services. Number one is school closures. If you aren't aware, haven't heard, Governor Cuomo has now ordered that schools remain closed through May 15th. So while we all hope that students can go back to school as soon as possible, we're going to have to see what happens for the rest of May and June. That's also going to impact summer services if your child receives summer services. But for right now, schools are closed through May 15th. There's also been talk, some back and forth, whether schools are just going to be closed through June. Nothing has come down officially yet, so it's something the DOE and your school should be keeping you posted on. Keep your ears open for it. If school is closed during the summer, the DOE and your school is going to have to try and provide your child with summer services if their IEP, their individualized education program, mandates it, just like they're providing them services now. And if your child is supposed to get summer services and doesn't receive anything, keep note of it, keep records of it, and we'll talk about why in a little bit.
Okay, the second reminder is about assistive technology. So this would be an iPad, a laptop, any device that either the Department of Education or your local school district would be providing you for remote learning, not necessarily a communication device. This is separate and apart from that. This learning device will help you access the education during this time. If you've not requested one yet, please do so. I spoke about this in my first webinar about a few weeks ago, that it's important to screenshot your request to the department or your district, to keep a copy and note any response that you get from them. There was a rumor out there about one iPad per family. This has been clarified to be one per child. So if you have more than one child at home and only one device, definitely reach out to your school or Committee on Special Education to obtain a device for each child. In addition, you're now eligible to request a device if you attend a charter school, live in a shelter, or live in foster care. So we're going to send the link in the chat. I'll actually do that right now so everybody can have access to that. That's for the New York City DOE, the form to fill out for devices. Additionally, if your child is in an approved private school, or sometimes referred to as a non-public school through the Department of Education, your school should be on that form. So if they're at that school, you should be discussing with your school if they're providing you the device or if you should go to the DOE for the device. If you're outside of New York City and your child needs a device and you've not requested one, please do so and document it. You can request that from your student's teacher, and if you need to move it up from there, the principal or the superintendent of your local district. As stated earlier by Allison, it's very important to keep records of any requests you make. Once you receive your device, if you don't have internet services, contact your school about this. The New York City Department of Education was trying to send out preloaded devices so that you wouldn't necessarily need Wi-Fi. You'd have a data plan on there already. But if that's not working for you, you don't have that either. We heard that Charter Cable, Spectrum, and AT&T are offering free services for 60 days. Neither of us have personally tried this or heard whether or not another family has tried it and it's worked, but it's something to look into if you're struggling to get Wi-Fi services. Also, if you receive a device and it's not working for whatever reason, let somebody know and document that as well.
Number 3 is attendance. So starting on April 6th, the DOE actually began taking attendance for your students. There's a memo on it, which I'm going to attach in the chat if anyone wants to read it. And it's a very flexible attendance policy since not all instruction is direct. So examples include if your child submits an assignment, if the student participates in a chat. For students who are in elementary school and younger, sometimes it's just communication with a family member. So keep note of that. And if your child is sick or needs to be absent, as though school was not closed and it's still in session, you really should contact the DOE in your child's school to let them know, my child's going to be absent. If your child was absent one day up until this point and you didn't let anyone know because things are a little bit lax right now, you should retroactively let the school know what days your child was absent and why, and do so going forward so that they know this was an excused absence. This is something you should also do if your child is outside New York City. So if your child can't complete assignments or instruction one day because they're sick, alert the school that they're going to be absent from school that day and keep a record of it. This is because at the end of the school year, if the school tries to say, we have that Johnny was absent for 3 days in mid-April, you can look back at your records and say, that's absolutely right, we sent you a note, these should be excused absences, he was sick. Or you can say, that's not right, he was not absent, he was submitting assignments, there's a glitch somewhere here, something's not right.
Okay, so number 4 is about state assessments. I know a lot of families are concerned about Regents exams. The June 2020 Regents exams are canceled. So if your child was going to be taking a Regents exam, if they pass the class that they were taking the Regents for, this will be treated as them passing the exam. So New York State is working to make sure that this does not impact any graduation requirements, including for students with disabilities who are working towards a CDAS diploma. I'm going to attach here the memo from the New York State Educational Department so you can review that if your child is being impacted by this.
Number 5 is about remote learning plans. So in New York City, if your child goes to a DOE school, every child with an IEP, an individualized education program, is entitled to and should be receiving something called a remote learning plan from their school that's outlining what their students' program and services are going to be during this time. This was supposed to be done and completed by March 23rd. We're now hearing a lot of people are just starting to get these remote learning plans now. So if you haven't received or haven't heard of this remote learning plan yet, hopefully you should be by the end of this week, early next week. And if you haven't, you absolutely should contact the Department of Education or your child's school. You can do that this week or next week to request this remote learning plan and document your request. This remote learning plan is supposed to be based on your child's IEP and their services on that IEP. You're supposed to be contacted by phone by someone from the DOE for them to explain to you what this remote learning plan is. They're supposed to be talking to you about what services are going to be, and instruction is going to be provided during this time to your child. If your child is supposed to have an assistive technology device, they're supposed to be confirming with you that it's home and you have it. They're also supposed to be talking to you if you're going to be getting teletherapy services for your related services, and to make sure you've signed a consent form for you to be able to start receiving that as soon as possible. I'm going to attach in the group chat the information on that remote learning plan. And once you have that remote learning plan, review it and compare it to your child's IEP, because you're going to be able to see what services are different from what the Department of Education is providing to your child now versus what they need to be providing to your child as per their IEP, because that's what the DOE needs to be providing. They might not be able to do it at this moment because of the current situation, but it is what your child is entitled to. And if you don't receive the services on your child's IEP, you might be entitled to make up services. That's why it's so important to keep documenting and noting everything that your child is or isn't receiving at this time. Like I said, it's the main takeaway today. We're going to talk about it again. And Fran also talked about it in a prior webinar of hers. Please note when you get this remote learning plan to note the date on it. If you receive it on April 27th, but it's dated March 29th, note that and send an email to someone from your child's school or the Department of Education confirming you've just received it. That's how you document you received it a month after they claim they sent it to you. If you're outside New York City or you're not in a Department of Education school, this doesn't apply to you. You're not going to be getting a remote learning plan, but you're the one who's going to have to be keeping track of your child's records of what instruction they're getting, the services they're getting. But this remote learning plan is a great example of how to keep that organized and how to keep note of that. So you could take your child's IEP and see they're supposed to be getting occupational therapy service 3 times a week, speech 3 times a week, physical therapy 2 times a week. But at the end of every week, maybe you know they only got all of these once a week. It's a good example for how to keep everything organized and document everything during this time. And that also goes for the type of instruction your child is getting. So in the DOE, you should be getting this remote learning plan, review it, take notes on it. Outside of the Department of Education, you can use it as an example for how to keep everything organized.
Okay. The next thing is about services and instruction. So remote instruction varies by school. I'm sure if some of you have more than one student at home, you see it variable in that respect as well. So some of the types of instruction families have been receiving are paper packets, online work, live instruction, live check-ins. I've also heard of some pre-filmed classes for students to view. There are different standards in each school, city, district, etc. And these standards are still changing as they're getting more acclimated to this remote learning process. The use of Zoom for educational purposes has been halted for the New York City Department of Education until further notice, but outside of New York City, school districts are still using it. Alternatives to Zoom that schools are using include Google Classroom, Google Hangout and Chat, and Microsoft Teams. So you might have seen a transition even in the type of software your school is using for your student. In addition, teletherapy can be used for related services, as Alison mentioned before. This would be a live video conference. The New York State Education Guidance reiterates this is allowed. And again, just keep track of the type of instruction your student's receiving, if it's working, and if there's any issues. If there are issues, you should let your child's school know. Another thing to note is if the teacher's checking in, but it doesn't seem like they're doing any work, they're just saying hello or letting the students speak to each other, that doesn't count as instruction.
Number 7 is about evaluations. New York State Education Department, NYSED, has released guidance, which is following federal guidance, and it's come down stating, quote, evaluations and reevaluations, including bilingual evaluations that do not require face-to-face assessment or observation, may take place while schools are closed if the parent consents. If an evaluation of a student with a disability requires a face-to-face meeting or observation, the evaluation would need to be delayed until school reopens. So what this means is if any type of evaluation needs that in-person face-to-face contact or observation, it has to wait until schools reopen. There's no way to consent around that. The school district is not going to agree to conduct it. If an evaluation or assessment can be done over the phone or virtually, and you want it to be done that way, you can consent to it being done that way. We absolutely understand the need for timely evaluations, but this is something to work with the district on because we want to make sure your children have comprehensive and appropriate evaluations. So if any evaluations can be conducted virtually, like we've just said, and like the guidance says, you absolutely can agree to that. You just want to consider if the evaluation being done that way is going to be comprehensive, or if you want to wait until it can be done face-to-face. The Department of Education or a school district might contact you at this time to conduct a social history or an updated social history. Those can and usually are done over the phone. Other than that, most evaluations are done over the face. If anyone's not aware, that social history is getting information from you, the parents, about how your child is doing, issues they're having. Usually you go over their educational background, their medical history, and then you bring up issues or concerns you're having. Social skill issues, sensory issues, feeding issues, wanting ABA, wanting Orton-Gillingham. And if you do one of those social histories, you really should also be bringing up any issues you're having now with the type of instruction and services your child is getting during this time. Like I said, other than that, most evaluations are being done face-to-face, and they're not going to be able to be conducted until schools reopen. There was an update that Fran had received from a special education task force that some IEP teams are doing these modified behavior scales remotely. But again, you have to decide if that's something you want to have done that way for your child. And if you do have a remote behavior scale done for your child, you might want to consider having a full behavior assessment done once schools reopen again.
Okay. Number 8 is consent forms and waivers. So do not consent to waive something unless you know what you're signing. So if you receive something from your district asking for your consent, especially if it's a waiver saying you're waiving something and you have an attorney, consult with them. If you do not have an attorney, make sure you read the form and ask your district questions until you understand what you're signing and what you're consenting to. You really should not waive you or your child's rights to instruction or makeup services, but as discussed, you might have to waive your right to timely evaluations during this time.
Number 9 is a reminder, document everything. As we've said today, as Fran discussed in her prior webinar, you should be keeping track of days your child went without instruction. If your child is getting instruction, the type of instruction being provided. For instance, like Fran said, if they're just calling you to check in, if you're just the one doing packets with them, you should be taking note of any related services being provided and how they're being provided, and any related services that aren't being provided. And that goes for parent counseling and training services that are supposed to be provided to you, the parents, during this time. And all of this is based on your child's IEP, your child's individualized education program. So the type of instruction, class size, related services, all should be in line with what your child's IEP mandates. So if your child's IEP says Johnny needs to get occupational therapy 3 times a week individually, and the OT provider is only calling once a week, you already know at the end of the week, at least 2 sessions of OT were missed that week. And then you'd want to note that, but also make note of that 1 session of occupational therapy that Johnny got. What did that occupational therapist do with Johnny? Did they just call you and ask you, how's Johnny's sensory issues going? Did they give you strategies to implement with Johnny about his sensory needs or feeding issues? Was it meaningful? Was it helpful? Make note of that. The same as Fran mentioned goes for the type of instruction your child's receiving. The teacher's calling once a week to say hi, it's not instruction. So make note of the type of instruction they're getting. If it's not direct, they're just sending packets. If they keep just sending the same work, if nothing's tailored to them, make note of this and let the district know these issues that you're having and keep a record of it, right? My child needs one-to-one, they're not getting it. The work you're sending home is too hard. Just keep documenting all of this. And this is all because you might be entitled to makeup services, including makeup instruction and makeup related services. So a month, 2 months, 3 months from now, if we're trying to decide, a school district or yourself are trying to decide, is my child entitled to makeup services? It's going to be easier to say, well, let's look at the services they did or didn't get in March and April, if you have notes of everything, than having to sort of do it off of your memory. So that's why it's so important to keep notes of everything and let the district know these issues. In addition, if English is not your primary language or you don't understand what a district is asking you to do, as Fran mentioned, please ask for documents or instruction in your language or a manner you understand. The Department of Education has said communication has to be in your home language. And if you don't understand something, please let the district know that.
Okay, our last reminder is about IEP meetings. So IEP meetings can take place. There's absolutely no reason they cannot be conducted over the phone or virtually. You and your district can and should be able to work that out. You should still be requesting and receiving documents the district wants you to use before the meeting for your review, whether it be in the mail or by email. If you don't have access to one or the other, let your district know so they know the best way to send the documents to you. These meetings should not be waived under the state memo, and you should not waive these. You should bring up any issues you had with your child's program placement and services prior to this time of remote learning, like you would do in a normal IEP meeting, as well as any issues you're having now with your child during this time of remote instruction, either with the instruction and/or related services during this time. I think Allison had mentioned this before. If your student's struggling to participate, let them know why, what you're doing, if they can give you any tips on how you can get your child to participate. Follow up on when you're going to receive the physical copy of the IEP. So typically after the meeting, you'll receive the document in the mail or by email. Ask when you're going to receive that, how you're going to receive that. Don't let them say, oh, you'll get it when we go back to school in September, because you're going to want to see what that document says, if it lines up with what you talked about at the meeting, and if you agree with it.
Those are the 10 updates and reminders we have. I'm going to be posting some resources in the chat now. One is, we keep mentioning NYSED, the New York State Education Department. We're going to post the link to it so you can keep updated on the memos they're putting out for what all school districts in New York have to do. There's free meals within New York City. There's a link for that. Advocates for Children, Synergia, those are other organizations and agencies that you can get information from. Steelhouse has informational videos. There's the National Alliance for Parents in Special Education, COPA, the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates. In addition, learning centers in the Bronx are offering one-on-one tutoring for students in grades 6 to 12. So we're gonna post these resources for you guys just to have additional information and resources available to you. And we just want to thank everyone so much for coming out to this webinar. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us, to reach out to us via email. You can ask questions in the chat. We're here for you during this time. We understand how frustrating it is, but we will get through it. We hope everyone is staying safe. Thank you guys so much.